Welcome into Rounding the Bases, the podcast about culture and leadership with a baseball twist, presented by Community America Credit Union. I'm Joel Goldberg, and my guest today has had a full career of success. And I don't know if I'd call it a post-career because he's still very active and involved in all types of different endeavors. Greg Graves is the former CEO and chairman of the 100% employee-owned Burns McDonnell Engineering and Construction Company. We've had the current CEO, Ray Kowalik, on. And as far as Greg goes, during his 13 years in the role, Burns and Mac grew employment 400% and revenue 1,000%. His proudest accomplishment as CEO, however, was Burns and McDonnell being named one of Fortune magazine's 100 best places to work 10 times, including being named number 14 in 2015. That's such an important element over at Burns and Mac, the culture piece that I want to be able to talk about. In retirement, Greg has focused his efforts on chairing one of America's largest academic hospitals, being the lead director for a $30 billion bank, and developing a large ranch property with his wife. So I told you he's still busy, and he is also a brand new author. And when I say brand new, within this past year or recent months, he wrote the book Create Amazing. It was published April 27th and named the #1 new release in America by Amazon for money and monetary policy. And it is my pleasure right now to bring into the podcast. See, we got him to slow down for us today. And if you're watching on YouTube, he's very coincidentally, or not so much so, wearing a Royals jersey. Greg Graves is my guest on Rounding the Bases. Greg, how are you?
Thank you, Joel. It's an honor to be here. I'm always excited to talk about the book, but I'm always just excited to talk about Kansas City too.
Yeah, we could talk Kansas City. We could talk leadership, culture, the book, a lot that we can digest. But let's jump into this. I've always found that CEOs that reached your level, running major companies, never really stop. You may quote unquote retire, but I haven't met a whole lot that have just disappeared forever and they sail off into the sunset. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, back to the baseball analogy, Joel. I haven't seen many pitches I don't like to swing at. And so I'm not very good at the no word. And
yeah,
I have to be incredibly busy or I go absolutely crazy. And so even a free hour is very bothersome to me.
Well, hopefully we'll spend a part of this hour in a good way. And you have been busy, and the book, obviously the latest of those endeavors, or maybe not the latest, but certainly a very significant one. Tell me about the book and what the process was like in writing that.
I've wanted to write this book for at least 10 years. And of course, when you're working for a living, you just can't get those kinds of things done. I'll tell you, writing a business book is infinitely harder than anyone wants to think it is. And while I recommend it highly, know what you're getting into. And so I have probably at least 2,000 hours involved in writing a book like this. It's amazing how much you have to read to write. And I have at least 15 books in me that I read before I wrote a book. But I wanted to write a book that wasn't just some about Greg or about Burns McDonnell or that history, even though I think it's an important one and a great one. I wanted to write a book that told America, and the people, of course, who will read it, the employee owners of other firms who will read it, executives from other firms who I know have read it, that this is a real important idea for America and the whole idea of social justice and wealth disparity. And while there's lots to talk about in a big subject like that, one anchor idea should be the idea of employees owning the companies where they work. And that's why I wrote Create Amazing. It's why I'm really proud, and we worked really hard on it. I have a great publisher and agent, of course, and it's already sold thousands and thousands of books.
It's pretty exciting, and I would imagine humbling too. And it's not much of a imagination piece for me, having written my first book in December, that you think about this for a long time, and then you watch the process happen, and I don't know, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. For me, it was kind of surreal to sort of see it come to life and see the effect that it has.
I'll tell you what, after 2 years and all this time, you've never see your book on a PDF. but on a PDF or a Word document. And then one day a big box shows up at your front door, and it's actually a book. And it's the first time you get sort of a 3D physical and you get to touch it. And it was a very weird moment for me, but it also made every minute of it worth it.
Yeah, I had the exact same experience of just, wait, I'm touching this thing now. It's not just on a screen. It's for anyone that's written a book, especially at first, they would understand. If you're thinking about writing a book, it's a whole different discussion. But I tell people all the time, because it seems like I keep bumping into more people saying, I've always thought about writing a book. Just start jotting ideas down. Just start going. That's a different discussion. But let's talk a little bit more about Create Amazing, and then we'll get back to a little bit of your career path. But this book focuses, and you just talked about it, and on the website, greggraves.com, America can be more economically competitive while solving for one of its greatest challenges, economic injustice, through the powers of employee ownership. Help me tie all that together, and I know you do that throughout the book, but how does that happen?
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about there. When COVID is finally behind us, I believe that the whole idea of economic justice is going to be the number one political, economic, social media topic in America, and I think that it should be. Wealth disparity hasn't been this bad in America since we got off ships and told England we don't want to be part of you anymore. And it's getting worse and worse by almost any definition. When the top 1% of America owns over 50% of all wealth, and I'm in that. And when the top 0.1% in America has over 50% of the annual income in America, that's just not gonna hold, and it's not right, and it's not sustainable. And so there's a lot to talk about there. Access to health care, access to child care, the American minimum wage, which is by any definition a dinosaur. It's so funny. The minimum wage is a great example of the federal government hasn't done anything about this, and some states and local municipalities can. So the American industry just took care of it for them, and there's almost no one left but a teenager who makes less than $15 an hour. And eventually, the federal government will do something about this. But I'm telling you that places like Burns McDonnell and KU Hospital and even small organizations, nobody makes $15 an hour anymore. And so there's a lot to talk about, the spread between what you can make on unemployment versus what you can make working. That spread needs to be bigger. And you can argue both sides of that equation, of course, but there's no question when you look at jobs reports in America that it needs to be bigger. I believe the most important thing that America can do is to look for more and more ways for employees, the American worker, to participate in the success of the companies where they work. And you can go back to all the sports analogies of NFL players, Major League Baseball players. They want their industries to do really well, because often the total amount of cash available to those players is based on the economic success of those leagues. And those same things can happen at American company after company after company. There's 12 million Americans already, American workers who work at employee-owned firms. And in the opinion of this guy, and in the calculation I do through the book, that number could be 100 million Americans. That would make those companies more competitive. It would make America more competitive internationally. We certainly need to look for ways to do that. And it would create substantially improvements in the economic justice equation in America, which then you can argue it solves for our Social Security problems. It solves for our Medicare problems. It solves for the retirement challenge that's getting worse and worse in America. Over half of Americans over 50 have zero saved for retirement. That's chickens coming home to roost. And this is, by any definition, one of the easiest, best strategies. It's supported by Republicans and Democrats in Washington. They both have agreed. In fact, I'm going to Washington in October, and they both agreed that more can be done here. And it gets to the point where we have to look for every incentive we can for every company we know to look more and more at the employee ownership model. And yes, Joel, sometimes only one question can have me talk for an entire podcast.
Well, and we could keep going because it's that big of an issue. And you know, I'm asking you to sum something up in minutes that could take a lifetime. That's what I think we're up against. You know, I was thinking about this in planning for this episode, that my experience with people that I've met at Burns and McDonnell, and when I've walked through the doors there, everywhere you look, there are mentions of employee owned and best place to work. There's a lot of pride in those accolades. And I would think everybody would want to be able to have pride in their employees, in their company. Yet it's a struggle to get others to where Burns and McDonnell was and is at this point. Everything that you're saying makes sense, right? And I think, and you tell me otherwise, that it has to begin with buy-in from the top. That top 1% that you're talking about, saying, wait a minute, this is a benefit to my company before it is even to society. I mean, the reality of it is most people end up thinking about themselves first. But once they see the benefit and how it can help them, then maybe they jump in. I'm oversimplifying, or I don't know if I'm getting it right, but how do you get that top 1% to get to where you were?
Yeah, and no one should feel sorry for Greg. he did really well as the CEO of Burns McDonnell, and as one of the 1,500 employee owners when I became CEO. Greg did just fine. But the key is, how about the person in the middle, and how about the person at the 75th percentile? Are they going to be dependent on the federal government during their retirement? And I can tell you that no one who spent a career at Burns McDonnell will ever need $1 from the federal government during their retirement. That solves so many issues for America looking forward. And if we want to have, a country that has some fiduciary responsibility, which I would claim we don't currently, then one of the things we have to solve for is fewer and fewer people being dependent on the federal government, especially during retirement years. And I can think of no better solution for that than creating another 100 million employee owners during that time. There are obstacles to some current companies taking on bigger employee ownership roles. Often it comes down to ego and greed. The great killers of American corporations, not just employee-owned corporations. And that's not always easy. I was the CEO of Burns McDonnell for 13 years, and you get used to people telling you how smart you are until about one day after you retire. But it's easy to fall victim to those things in life, not just, of course, in business. And boy, do you need the right support system at home and around you at work to make sure those don't overcome you. To start thinking every decision you've made is right, because sure enough, when you swing as often as we talked about that I did, you miss a lot. I know that I had my grandchildren the other day, and I said, who has the most home runs in the history of the Kansas City Royals? Well, Salvi, of course, 'cause they're all little, right? I said, no, George Brett. Who do you think has the most singles, doubles? But then I said, who do you think's made the most outs in the history of the Kansas City Royals? Well, it couldn't be George Brett. Well, it is George Brett, of course. And like the Pete Rose numbers. And so you've got to swing. And we desperately need owners of American private companies to realize that their employees are who made them wealthy, and their workers are who made them successful, not their nieces and nephews. And so let those grandchildren or children or nieces and nephews, let them benefit through the sale of your company, not through them just hanging on and on and on. And it's where we could turn at least 25 million American workers into employee owners. And then at these, of course, big mega corporations, it's not going to be as simple. But that doesn't mean those companies couldn't go to a 5% employee ownership model or a 10% employee ownership model. And all the data suggests that every time you increase that employee ownership ratio, your company will perform better. And in the end, you are a fiduciary of the shareholders, of course, of that company and the company itself. When a company becomes employee owned, that fiduciary duty becomes infinite. And it makes it very simple to make good decisions over time. Like, do we want this to be a great place to work, or do we just want to drive our people, into the ground to make this quarter's numbers the best? Well, that's a very easy decision. And it's not always that easy at other American corporations who tend to think short term. When you think long term, whether it's in baseball or in business, you're going to end up with a much better result.
So I'll follow up with this one question again. Why is that so difficult for so many? Is it simply greed? Well,
you have a lot of U.S. corporations that think very short term. Very short term. They are prisoners almost of tomorrow's stock price, or of the quarterly result, or what's going to be the quarterly dividend this year. You have many private corporations who are absolute prisoners of the greed and ego of the person who founded it, or worse, that second or third generation. And if there's anything that's been proven in America time and time again, that almost never works. Now, there's examples of it being, uber successful. Don Hall Sr., who was the second generation in Hallmark, took his company to unbelievably great things. And there's other ones in Kansas City too. But more often, the example is Burns McDonnell lasted 2 generations and then sold the company off for the most money they could get to Armco Steel, who almost went broke, and Burns McDonnell almost didn't exist if it hadn't been for the ESOP model. And that would have been bad for me, and it would have been bad for Kansas City. And it really gets down to can we convince more and more people to at least explore this and to do the right thing.
Last question before I get to my baseball themed questions. When did all of this click for you? I mean, I know that's a very wide-ranging question, but was it during your stint as CEO at Burns & Mac? Was it before then? It couldn't have been after, but when did this all sort of click, this passion for the topic and the importance of it?
For me, I remember the exact moment, Joel. Well, we became employee-owned in 1986. I'd worked at Burns McDonnell for 6 years, and I was on a field assignment in Louisville, Kentucky. And so I heard the news, of course, that we were buying ourselves back from Armco Steel. We were going to be employee-owned now. And my first thought was, I better get my resume up to speed, because I don't know how well this is going to work out. 6 years to the day, Burns McDonnell became employee-owned. I got my ESOP report that told me how many shares of the company I now owned and what those shares were worth. And I opened it, and it was the 5th or 6th time I'd seen it. And I opened up, and I had what I called the whoa moment. And I had the moment of opening it up and say, whoa, my ESOP account is worth more than my house. And for every employee, now the job, or the CEO's job, is to get those employee owners to that whoa moment as soon as possible. Once you get your employee owners to whoa, your turnover rate drops to nearly zero, at least of the ones you want to stay, and those who don't retire and go off into the sunset with glory. Your client service gets better, your risk management gets better, your safety numbers improve, and all the other good things that executives want.
It's a heck of a whoa moment, and I think that actually answers a lot of what we've been talking about too. Can we get people to that whoa moment. All right, let me get to the baseball themed questions. First one,
Okay.
throughout your career, whether it's recently with the book or as CEO of Burns and Mac or all the way from back in the beginning, what's the biggest home run that you have hit professionally?
Mine would be the moment that Melissa Wood, my former chief administrative officer and one of my very best friends who lost her life to ovarian cancer just 2 years ago, walked in my office and said, Fortune magazine called. And after 4 years of just absolute focus on making our place not a great place just to retire from, but a great place to be every day, that Fortune magazine had for the first time named Burns and Mac one of the top 100 places to work in America. And it's my favorite moment in my entire career.
And the pride attached to that too. What did you see from all your people when that news came out?
I say this in the book. It's okay to call yourself a great place to work. It's okay to say we are a great place to work. We're an important place to work. We're a place where people ought to want to come to work. It's okay for the CEO to get up and absolutely preach from the pulpit that doggone it, we're a great place to work. And if there's things to make it better, tell me. If the things we can do or can't do, we'll do it. It's our only goal. I remember the day we announced that to employees, I sent out an email and I said, I'll meet you in the parking lot in 5 minutes. And about the time people hit the front door, the Boulevard Brewery 18-wheelers were pulling up and we handed out 6 packs of beer to every employee owner. I had one that said, if we're not a great place to work now, Greg, we will be by 5. So from that point on, we always served the beer. We always handed out the beer warm. Go home, cool it down, and then drink the beer. It's this. Sometimes culture has to be built up, but sometimes it has to be led. And being a great place to work has to be led. You have to not just do the right things. You have to believe the right things. And your employees, they know if you're doing it or if you believe it. And it is so important that you believe that them being happy and having great self-esteem in what they do and believing what they do is important. There's no more important thing.
Well said. How about a swing and a miss? You mentioned you like to swing often, the good ones too. And you're right, back to the baseball reference or analogy before. We could look it up. I'm not going to right now, but I'm guessing that if you start looking at most outs in baseball, of an active player, it's going to be someone like Albert Pujols. And you don't make that many outs unless you've been around a long time. You don't stay around a long time unless you're productive and good and all the things in whatever your role is. So my way of asking you, of all of those swings, what's been the biggest swing and miss, and what did you learn from it?
I have one grandson who every year leads his team in singles, doubles, triples, hitting, slugging, et cetera, and is always last on his team in walks. And I go, sometimes you got to be a little pickier. He goes, but I always hit it. I said, well, okay, but we'll see. I've had lots of swings and misses, and it's really important and your people love it. They love it when the CEO stands up at the annual meeting and says, you know what, we got that wrong. That was my call and we were wrong. If I have one that for your podcasters to hear, it's every time a family member has given me an investment tip, I swung and missed. And so when you get an investment tip from somebody who doesn't know 100% about what they're doing, don't do it. Go to the professionals at Wells Fargo or Cornitzer or whoever and take their advice instead. I think Deanna and I are over on investment.
All right, that's good to know, and we'll see how the rest of that goes over time. And by the way, not everybody likes to take those walks. As my broadcast colleague Rex Hudler says all the time, if he wanted to be a mailman, he would take more walks. But hey, Salvador Perez, as we're recording this right now, has tied his career high in walks with 22. So there's still hope for the grandson.
Yeah, the Moneyball guy would disagree with us.
Yes, he would.
On base percentage, but I like to swing.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And by the way, the game changes too. And so Moneyball back then might be a little bit different than it is now. That's also a different discussion. Final baseball theme question, small ball. It's what I wrote my book on. Mm-hmm. The singles, the bunts, the little things. What are the little things that add up to success for you in your world? What is small ball?
I'll tell you what, at engineering and construction firms, every day hustle and client service pays off over and over and over again. Employee firms out hustle their competition. They out client service their competition, and that constant contact with your clients to make sure that they're happy, that you're doing a good job, that you're doing everything that's expected of them, schedule-wise, cost-wise, safety-wise. A really good example of that is your presenting sponsor, Community America Credit Union. They are a great example of making sure their customer is happy every day. And they have one of the best CEOs in the history of Kansas City, and Lisa Gintner. And the second one that I'd have to say, though, is attention to safety. Safety is such a small, minute thing to talk about at most places. At my firm, it's the beginning of every day. Is we're going to make sure everybody go home safe today. And that's not just some drafter on his computer screen in Kansas City, but the 10,000 construction workers that are on your projects all over the world. That little attention to safety, that small ball every day. Do we have our work gloves on right? Do we have our safety glasses on right? Et cetera, et cetera. Those always pay off in the future. It's amazing at Burns Mac. If you look at our most successful jobs, they were almost always our safest jobs too.
Interesting. 4 final questions as we round the bases. First one, I just want to go back in time and to a young Greg Graves. Everything is obviously worked out beautifully in your life, and you're making an impact. You have a platform, everything that we have discussed and more. What were the dreams and aspirations of a young Greg Graves?
The youngest Greg Graves wanted to be Mickey Mantle back in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And then he wanted to be Tony Oliva because the Minnesota Twins were very popular in Kansas City. I loved baseball growing up to the extent that in little towns you could be on multiple teams. I would play on 2 or 3 little baseball teams. And already in high school, I was playing on adult softball teams that my baseball coaches really, really hated. I went to small town South Dakota schools and small town South Dakota colleges where, thank God, I met Deanna, and we moved to Kansas City. And we thought we were moving to Singapore. It was such a big town for me. And I think I've usually gotten it right. Until later in my career, I probably didn't. But I usually had it right where I was always aspirational, but mostly I just wanted to be really, really good at what I was doing.
Interesting stuff. Okay, second question as we round the bases, and I mentioned this in the intro to the podcast, all of your post-retirement, if that's such a thing, endeavors and, chairing one of America's largest academic hospitals, being the lead director of a $30 billion bank, developing large ranch property. What, beyond the causes that you have talked about here with me today, what gets you out of that? What gets you excited? Whether that's something with Deanna or on your own. Like I said, you're not taking a lifetime vacation here. What's got you fired up?
The most exciting thing in retirement, of course, is we have 7 grandchildren. And our 7th one just a couple of months ago.
Congrats.
And grandchildren are so beyond different than having kids because it's about 1% of the worry and it's 1,000,000% of the love. And you can just enjoy and love them without worrying about, what's going to happen to them next or how are they doing in school, because you have so much better perspective about those things. I have thoroughly loved being involved in other Kansas City institutions, especially during retirement, like UMB Financial, the University of Kansas Health System, the Barstow School, a startup company in Kansas City called Tech Excel that a lot of the great entrepreneurs in Kansas City have been behind. And it is great fun when you're retired to actually be able to spend the time to be good at being a fiduciary, just instead of just trying to keep up while you're still working. Deanna's my greatest love is our ranch property near Drexel, Missouri at 600 acres. It took 2 years to get a permit and 4 months to build a dam. And we have our very own Lake Deanna on that property now. And it is my great science experiment of retirement, is watching my little 3-inch bass become 4-pound bass already. And if you can't catch a fish there, you just don't know how to fish.
And sounds incredibly relaxing too, and perfect for an engineer. So you could still be working on all that type of stuff and get to enjoy it.
Yeah, engineers need boxes to check.
Yeah,
you know, like write a book, learn to fly, build a ranch, build a lake, do this or that. And I like checking boxes, and get on the podcast for the Kansas City Royals, Joel Goldberg, and now I can check that box off today, and obviously have great fun with it all.
It's good stuff, and I'm sure more coming. Tell me about the family foundation and how much of your time that takes, and I've got to imagine too. Again, when you're in that top 1% or however we want to characterize you, that means you have a lot of opportunities that others don't have.
Mm-hmm.
All I know very well earned, but to be able to do that with Deanna and to be able to make an impact, how important is that to you?
Deanna and I believe that when you are, I tend not to use the word lucky anymore, but when you're as benefited as we are, when you're as lucky as Deanna and I have been in life, a lot should be expected of you. And we expect a lot of ourselves and others who have been that, generous or have been that benefited in life. And so we have formed the Graves Family Foundation. It's not as big as some of the big dogs in town, but for us, it's a lot. And we enjoy immensely the fact that now we can do some things for other people financially, and not just through our time and efforts, not just our fiduciary time, et cetera, but to give a little back, we spend 99% of that money in Kansas City. And one of the most important things we do is make sure that every one of our children has a budget every year from that foundation, to make sure we're creating that genetically in our children and grandchildren. And then when our grandchildren turn 10, they get a budget. It's a small one, of course, but giving can be taught, and being generous can be taught. And we believe in that, and we're going to continue to believe in that in the future.
A great legacy to be able to create and pass on. Fourth and final question, my walk-off question then, and this could be foundation related, it could be ranch related, who knows what, but I've sort of referenced, I think, a couple of times that there's always more. So what is next, or what is that bucket, whether it be something fun or something extremely significant to society? It doesn't make a difference, but what's that next bucket, or what's that one bucket that you just can't wait to check off?
My publisher says I should do another one of these. But the economics of writing books is definitely not one. You don't write it for the money. That's for sure. I think when Amazon sells one of my books for $25, I get $3, and I haven't seen a penny so far. So we'll see how that goes. Deanna and I have so many more goals in life, so many places that we haven't been. But our most important buckets we have to figure out, our most important boxes that we have to figure out next are those legacy boxes. And that might sound highly egotistical, but it's past you boxes. what will happen to the trust, what will happen to the ranch, what will happen to the grandchildren, what will happen to who you are and what you meant. And we work very hard on those boxes now. And even though we're still only in our 60s, to make sure that the right things are being done, I'd like to work really hard after this book on the whole employee ownership idea. I've been invited to Washington once already, and I'm being invited, I know, at least once again, to make sure that because it's one thing to write a book and have a few thousand people buy it and read it. That's great. It's been great fun. But now where can I make a real difference? And I already have 3 firms that I'm working with who want to explore the idea of becoming employee owned. They really like my consulting fee because it's 0. And and Washington likes my consulting fee because it's 0. And I want to actually make a tangible difference at a certain number of firms and in legislation in Washington to make this really important and great idea actually happen.
Yeah, there's a lot of legacy and impact in there, and hey, yes, they won't argue with that fee as well, but incredibly meaningful. And I want to let everybody know that they could find out more about Greg's work and the book at greggraves.com. And the book, as I've mentioned, is titled Create Amazing. It was out in April. You could also find out more about Greg, whether it's going to the website or you can find him on Twitter at Greg M. Graves, or he's on LinkedIn. But again, the website is certainly a good place to go. This is a lot of fun. Greg, I want to just tell you congratulations on the book, having been through one myself in the last year. As I said, it's a very surreal experience, but a very rewarding one. And I know that the impact you're making and big picture is so significant and so important. So congratulations on that. More importantly, the family, the grandkids, and everything you're doing with them. I hope there are a lot of bass to catch and a lot of fun times for you and the kids and the grandkids in the days, weeks, months, and years to come.
Joel, here's to you being in person at baseball games again. And here's to John Sherman for what he's done for Kansas City and keeping the Royals here forever. I've seen George Brett hit a home run in a World Series. I've seen Alex Gordon hit a home run in a World Series, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the next one.
Yep, and there will be more indeed. Well said. Greg, thanks so much for spending time on Rounding the Bases.
All right. Thank you, Joe.